And let me share my screen really quickly. All right, well, good afternoon and welcome everyone. It is great to have you all joining us for today's session as a part of our AAPI Strong California training series. My name is Elizabeth Merced, Program Manager for the AAPI Strong California program, operated under the California Asian Pacific Chamber of Commerce, and I will be moderating this live training. If you are joining us for the first time, AAPI Strong is part of the national AAPI Strong movement led by our longtime friend and partner, National ACE. Together, our goal is to connect the AAPI community, including our small business owners, throughout the United States with resources to combat discrimination while also finding solutions together. These solutions have taken the form of trainings and roundtable series that we've hosted since the start of this year. If you'd like to learn more, you can visit our website, calasiancc.org/AAPI Strong CA, which will be shared in the chat with you. And by popular demand, we bring back Asian American mental health, trauma, and healing with guest speaker Hannah Lee. Today's session will include educational information about mental health trends, stigma, and trauma experienced by the AAPI community, and also discuss further steps to access support and mobilize for collective action and allyship. As mentioned before, joining us to facilitate this training is Hannah Lee, who is an expert in developing curriculum and providing training on racial equity, immigrant stress, and Asian American mental health. She has published and spoken at local and national conferences on these same topics, and also served on the board of the Korean American Coalition. Before we dive any further, I do have a few housekeeping notes. And following these housekeeping notes, we'll have a quick message from our sponsors. So today's session will be recorded and will be distributed after the session. If you have any questions for Hannah, please use the Q&A function below. And if you have any technical questions, please reach out to me directly via the chat function. And now a special message from our sponsors.
Together with the Cal Asian Chamber of Commerce, we're taking a stand with the Asian American and Pacific Islander community, including our employees, customers, and anyone who has been affected by anti-Asian hate. The violence against the AAPI community serves as an urgent reminder that we need to dismantle systemic racism and confront explicit and implicit bias that prevents us from creating a truly equitable world. As we push for progress, Verizon has committed $10 million to accelerate social justice across the AAPI community and joins as a proud sponsor of the AAPI Strong California program.
At PG&E, we have a very long history and a valued partnership with the Cal Asian Chamber. Our mission is to support people, the planet, and the prosperity of California customers and communities. The AAPI Strong California Project's leadership and its focus on anti-bias, anti-harassment, and violence prevention work for AAPI businesses is a model program in California. We look forward to continue our long historic partnership and supporting our AAPI Strong California project.
Supporting AAPI small businesses is one of our core focus because we understand their role in helping local communities thrive. Unfortunately, they have been hit especially hard during the pandemic due to the rise in anti-Asian hate and violence. As a sponsor of the Cal Asian Chamber of Commerce AAPI Strong California program, this project will provide the tools they need to speak up, protect themselves, combat bias, harassment, and violence. So as we emerge from this pandemic together, we will emerge AAPI strong.
All right, and without further ado, please join me in welcoming Hannah Lee.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the introduction, Liz. I'm going to attempt to start this PowerPoint and share a screen with you all. Oops. All right. Can everyone see that? Just maybe a thumbs up. Cool. All right. As Liz mentioned, my name is Hannah. I'm so honored to be here with you today. We'll go over the agenda of kind of what we'll be talking about and what we'll be discussing, but just wanted to express some gratitude around each and every person that has joined us in this space. So as far as what we'll be covering, I'll just go over some quick statistics and mental health trends that are true for the Asian American community, particularly to do with mental health, but trauma as well, and how it's experienced in the API community. And then we're going to watch a lovely video that was produced and published by the AAPI Strong California project, and just to kind of have a space for us to connect with a story that I'm sure a lot of us can, those that identify as Asian American and Pacific Islander, can really relate to at this time. And then we'll talk a little bit about mental health stigma. I'll be giving you some definitions and ways to understand stigma, the effects of stigma. And then we're going to have a bit of a community space. And so what this will look like is I'll talk a little bit about what collective action and healing looks like in our community, related to our cultural values, our cultural identities, our collective identities. And we're going to actually have some time for you all to share your reflections, your thoughts, and your stories towards the end. So I know that, this is not a physical space, it's a virtual one, but by now I feel like, folks are warming up to being vulnerable online. Most of the patients I see, I think have, I've seen great progress over the screen as well. So just want to preemptively really encourage each and every one of you that, with whatever comes up in our space today, that you take the step forward to also share with us in our time together. So that's, I think, a good segue for me to lead into this point. But before we get started, today is meant to be a safe space, and particularly the community conversation space. We want to encourage you to be vulnerable and step in and share your experiences as well as your thoughts. Especially because, right, this is a pretty emotional topic, and it could elicit, right, some reactions. But I do want to stress before we start that it is not a therapeutic one, right? This isn't group therapy. The goal isn't, treatment, as opposed to it being a space where we're really coming and sharing forth our identities, our experiences together. So I want to encourage you to step in, but also step out. So be brave in participation, but also know when to respectfully listen. Use I statements. And this is important because we don't want to generalize, my individual experience, your individual experience, to being the same one as folks from whoever else from our own community, or communities of different racial, ethnic backgrounds. Also respect other people's personal space. So this might, to chew on this, to right, like share what you feel like is true, but also give the same honor and respect to others when they're sharing as well. We want to discourage from advice giving, and this is important because, right, this is more of a space for brave participation of things that might, be a vulnerable experience. So we don't want to, right, meet people and kind of slap on, right, a Band-Aid of what's going on. And so we want to encourage, again, everyone to be really respectful and kind. But also lastly, welcome diverse opinions. I'm looking at the participants, and it looks like there's about 58 of us. And I'm sure that there are, a wide gamut of what mental health, trauma, experiences of discrimination, racism, all of those things. It's going to look really different. And there might be shared experiences, but we really want to encourage you all to hold space for each other. There will be some resources for mental health if you're interested in therapy or other, therapeutic spaces towards the end. I'm also, I'm going to be providing my email address at the end, so happy to answer any questions about any of those resources. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so some trends in the AAPI community related to mental health. So suicide has been found as the leading cause of death for AAPI folks from 15 to 24 years old, right? So this is really hitting our young people, our young adults. And this data is pretty recent, right? In 2019, they found that the Health and Human Services, by the way, are the folks that collected this data. They found that Asian men and adolescents are particularly at risk. And right, there are some cultural explanations for this as well. We won't go into each point too much, but again, right, something to chew on. Southeast Asians, so the folks that identify as Cambodian, Vietnamese Americans in particular, have high rates of symptoms for psychiatric disorders. So this has been presented as PTSD and major clinical depression. AAPI folks are 60% less likely to have received mental health treatment compared to folks that identify as white. And only 4.9 of Asian American Pacific Islanders utilize mental health services. And this is federal data. It's from the Substance Abuse Mental Health Service Administration. And this is compared to all other ethnic minority groups. So even, compared to other folks of color, right, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders were the lowest help seeking. But right, with the data that we have kind of in the beginning, we know that it's not because they don't need it, right? But there are some cultural reasons for why these statistics might be emerging. And we'll get to that part a little bit later as well. Just continuing on, Asian American Pacific Islander college students also report more barriers to mental health care. So generally, they're reporting that the cost, convenience, and some negative attitudes related to receiving mental health care are the primary factors of which serve as the reasons why they're not accessing care. But also they are reporting that cultural reasons such as the loss of face and family stigma have a lot to do with not accessing mental health care as well. On the flip side, when AAPI folks do access mental health services, they're typically more severely disturbed than other ethnic minorities. And so actually, let me go back to this slide. I think what I've seen in my own practice and in doing research around Asian American mental health as well, a lot of Asian American folks go to their primary care providers and or their religious communities, so churches, right, mostly. And leaders in those organizations for mental health care first before they're accessing mental health professionals. And so I think there are some reasons for that as well related to the loss of face and the shame that we touched on a bit earlier. But this is kind of a snapshot into what's going on. To continue, these are also some reasons. I pulled this from, I think, one particular study, but there is, pressure for Asian American young people, particularly to be academically or professionally successful, and they have learned from their parents or mentors or folks from earlier generations that there is no space in mental health if you want to be successful, right? So this kind of pervasive sense of survival, right, which is a traumatic stressor or a result of trauma. That leads folks, Asian American Pacific Islander folks, to ignore and or deny mental health symptoms. There's also cultural taboos, right? I'm sure that folks have heard this in different settings, but the nail that sticks out gets, slammed down, hammered down even further, right? So just keep your head down, be quiet, do what you need to do to be able to be financially stable. And these are all really great things. And I think they're really reflective of the resilience of the AAPI community and what they've had to endure to be able to get to the place that they're in now. But it doesn't serve well in terms of really protecting one's well-being or sense of self, right? And another one is the model minority myth. And this is a kind of a pervasive belief that AAPI folks are a group that seamlessly integrated into the US. And so, right, like they have identified and its roots, its historical roots. I did another training on Asian American history, but this history is rooted in the majority folks trying to pit communities of colors against each other to serve a political purpose. But right, there was this identity that was given to Asian American folks that was not created on their own, but for them to identify as industrious, intelligent, resourceful, and in control. And its historical roots are again in the civil rights movement. And it was around that time that this idea was published in media and things like that to kind of portray AAPI folks in a certain way. Also, this part is something I touched on a little bit earlier with the psychosomatization. So AAPI folks tend to seek medical support for psychological distress. They end up going to their providers, end up, running labs and tests and find out there's nothing wrong with them. But right, the mind-body connection is a very strong one. And, when somebody is experiencing racing heart or insomnia, headaches, right, this can be like physiological presentations of mental health concerns such as anxiety, depression, addiction, psychiatric disorders. But because it's not the first place that AAPI folks go to in terms of understanding maybe why they're not feeling so well, again, they end up kind of at a provider that isn't able to meet kind of all of their needs. The last point to this is culturally irresponsive therapy. So even when folks do, seek out mental health services, the field of psychology at large and mental health, right, and social work or marriage family therapy are still predominantly white. And even the methods of therapy are kind of catching up to becoming culturally competent, right? Like starting from the late 90s or so that, mental health professionals started recognizing like, oh, this is not working for everybody. And then they realized, right, like the roots of psychotherapy as we understand it now have its origins in Western Europe. And so, right, everyone probably knows the name of like Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung and stuff like that. But you try to do that with, an Asian American immigrant or a Pacific Islander, it wasn't landing. And so that's another reason why there's, pretty high attrition rates for Asian American folks as well. Okay, so that was just some general mental health trends in the community. I want to transition into trauma specifically. And let me, not very technologically savvy, so I'm going to try to do this. Can you all see it? Can somebody just give me a thumbs up if you can see that it's on a YouTube video?
We see your PowerPoint slide deck.
Okay, let me go. New share. Okay, what about now? Okay, so that looks good.
I don't think we can hear the audio.
Okay, let me go back. Can you hear it now?
I believe so.
No, we're not hearing it.
Oh, it faded out.
Okay.
Let's see.
Okay. Liz, but you can hear it? That's interesting.
I was hearing the ringing for a little bit, but
yeah,
it faded out. Let's see. Here, would you like me to share it on my end?
Yeah, hold on. Let me, because I know it's kind of quiet in that scene. Can you just see if this is working?
今天在街上有人推他，
Can you hear it? Can you
他
guys,
摔了。
can somebody, whoever shouted out that they weren't able to hear it, are you able to hear it now?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Okay, then I'll scroll back. That part I think is just a little bit quiet when the phone is just ringing.
喂，小来啦，我是妈妈，知道你还没回家呢。我和大一现在在医院呢。今天在街上有人推他，他摔了。我们在这儿可能暂时还回不去。弟弟放学后，你要好好照顾弟弟，应该帮着做做饭。饭我已经焖好了，菜也切好了，葱姜也准备好了，你就炒一下就可以了，好不好？就这样，有事给我打电话，好吗？好，再见。
Okay. Okay, are we back on the PowerPoint?
We can still see the web browser.
Okay. Zoom is not my friend. There we go. PowerPoint?
Not quite.
Okay, how about now?
There, now.
Okay, there we go. Okay, great. Okay, so just to kind of give you a quick definition of what trauma is, we'll talk a little bit about how it applies to the community as well. But so SAMHSA has defined trauma as an event, series of events, or set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual or community as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening, and that has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. So pretty broad definition, right? And so I think, but again, this definition even applies to different communities and individuals in a very unique way. But what we know about effects of trauma, and these are very kind of quick snippets of the effects of trauma, but first of the effects are behavioral. So self-injurious behavior that can look like cutting, burning oneself, even reckless behavior, which is tied to chronic health, but also risky sexual behavior has been shown as an effect of trauma that is that is pretty common. Chronic health, right? So the dependence of substances such as smoking, excessive drinking, and or drugs to cope with some of the mental health effects of trauma. And this will also present as diagnosable disorders. So clinical depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder. And also trauma has a very pervasive effect on functioning, and whether that's in relationships, right? So we see a lot of intergenerational conflict between Asian and Pacific Islander parents and their children. And then also for, the first and second generation, their relationship with their peers or loved ones in different settings as well. Also shows up in occupationally, right? So like difficulty stress managing, difficulty, with really a sense of feeling like I'm doing enough. And those are some of the ways that trauma kind of bleeds into these areas. Trauma in the AAPI community in particular, we can understand it in a couple of different ways. And so first of them are, folks that have immigrated from tyrannical or oppressive regimes. And so folks that had lived in these regimes have a disproportionate exposure to violence, right? And so we see this most in our Cambodian Vietnamese Americans. And when they come, even to the United States seeking asylum, a lot of their ways of being able to survive in this country are damaged by what they've experienced in their home countries. This is also applicable to Korean folks, right? With the Korean War, the colonization, like Japanese colonization for Chinese folks. It's a very common story, right? War is not very far removed from the AAPI community and exposure to war. And hence this, need for survival and operating from that mindset. But this, these are again vulnerabilities to being able to achieve mental health. Another one is racial trauma, right? And so what, folks have experienced in their motherlands or home countries or from, different generations is one thing, and it does get passed down to their children or their children's children. But even the racial trauma that they experience after they move to the United States, right? This country that's supposed to be a land full of opportunities and equality, a lot of times AAPI folks have experienced it as quite differently. And even before the pandemic, I think this was a pretty common experience. You ask really a lot of AAPI folks, and they can refer to someone in their community or themselves or their family that had experienced discrimination or hate and prejudice. And I really like the part of the video that's your English is so good, right? And that's meant to be a compliment, but something like that is a microaggression against does that mean that I don't belong here? What is it about my language abilities that you are assuming that I shouldn't be able to speak English, right? But COVID really exacerbated these experiences. We saw violence very kind of out in the open, right? A lot of the stories that we were hearing when the pandemic first started were Asian elders that were being attacked on the streets, businesses particularly being vandalized. There being death threats and blame for the pandemic, on Asian American Pacific Islander folks. And so, very understandable that in terms of what everybody was dealing with the pandemic, with the sense of isolation, threats to economic stability, with all this racial trauma going on, there was some consequences to that in terms of the anxiety, depression, and sleep disturbance AAPI folks were reporting around this time. And as I touched a little bit earlier too, so the intergenerational trauma aspect, this is a transmission of the effects of trauma. So even if a second generation AAPI person hadn't been exposed to war themselves, that passes down through generations within families and communities. And this is through the means of cultural normalizations, right? Again, the shame, stigma, and this has led to the distress of others, negative self-esteem, hypervigilance, and functional impairment in different ways as well. Okay, and we are going to try to do this again. Let me actually go back. Can you all see the YouTube video?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
You keep calling this the Chinese virus. There are reports of dozens of incidents of bias against Chinese Americans in this country. Why do you keep using this? A lot of people say it's racist.
It's not racist at all. No, not at all. It comes from China.
A number of factors have led to the rise of anti-Asian hate during this pandemic. One is obviously the inflammatory political statements of certain politicians during this time period.
President Trump's blaming of China, his refusal to wholeheartedly disavow hate groups, and his encouragement of violence through rhetoric at his rallies and online have led to dangerous splitting and othering.
In 2020 alone, it was reported that nearly 2,800 hate incidents were committed against Asian Americans.
Scapegoating causes injury, conflict, and grief. The elderly Thai American man in Oakland who was shoved and killed in his driveway did not deserve to die. The Burmese American family shopping in Texas did not deserve to be attacked. And the 2-year-old child did not deserve to have his face slashed. I can go on and on. Nothing is solved by harming the innocent.
Regarding being a direct target of racial discrimination, this has tremendous insidious effects as well as toxic effects on individuals and communities that are targeted.
Hatred is toxic to well-being. Being targeted by discrimination and power imbalances directly impacts perceived safety and belonging, which impact mental health.
Actual fear of the possibility, even worse, actual experience of being threatened, attacked, cause negative physical and emotional reactions.
When an individual is victimized by hate activity, it can lead to post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, panic attacks, nightmares, and depression.
Research shows that the experience of discrimination, whether through institutional barriers or interpersonal interactions, such as racial slurs used by one individual against another, impacts health by operating as an ongoing stressor, causing progressive wear and tear on the body, which ultimately results in worse health outcomes.
In addition, these separate instances can reactivate prior instances of racial trauma in vulnerable populations, ultimately having a compounding effect.
Asian American parents have been more reluctant to allow their children to return to in-person schooling because of fears of racism, potentially leading to mental health impacts.
Some estimates are that 1 in 4 Asian American students has been bullied or victimized by anti-Asian sentiment during the pandemic. So no wonder the Department of Education has found that Asian American students are the most likely among all ethnicities to not return to school for in-person learning.
Recent research also suggests that discrimination may affect people through less direct means, such as avoidance of healthcare appointments or checkups. To address this head-on, we need bilingual therapists, caseworkers, and outreach workers who approach their potential patients where they live, where they work, and where they conduct their business and daily activities. We need to teach them to identify, practice, and address microaggressions at the time that they occur.
Please talk with each of your patients that either spontaneously share with you their concerns or may have known that they've had this may be affecting them.
The APA newspaper, Psychiatric News, published a special report called Asian American Hate Incidents, a co-occurring epidemic during COVID-19. I'd refer psychiatrists and therapists to this publication for tips on counseling victims of anti-Asian hate. I'd also encourage reporting incidents to stopaapihate.org. It's an online reporting site run by Asian American advocacy organizations in San Francisco.
All mental health is cultural mental health, from neurons to neighborhoods to the world itself. As psychiatrists, I hope we can amplify our understandings of the social determinants of mental health and begin to understand the individual is not separate from their relationships or society. We are who happens to us and what we make of the happening. And we are all happening to each other. I hope we can make the best of this.
The drive towards equity and equality begins with really active listening. And I think in the APA, we are in that stage of the solution.
We can work together as BIPOC communities in solidarity to dismantle structures of oppression, including structural racism in our country.
Okay, I will stop that there and transition back again. So this video was meant for mental health providers, just to kind of give them, give non-API identifying mental health providers just a kind of glimpse into what's been going on in the community. But I felt like it was a good, way to also, share with you all on the experiences of API folks as well. Let's see, play from current slide. Okay, Liz, can you see that? Okay, great. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about the last part of the educational piece about our time today, and that is stigma, the role of mental health stigma. So for definition's sake, what is stigma? Stigma is the negative attitudes and beliefs towards a group that creates prejudice, which leads to negative actions and discrimination. So stigma associated with the process of seeking mental health intervention is the negative perception that an individual who receives psychological help is socially undesirable. The effects of stigma on mental health is the reluctance to seek help or treatment, lack of understanding by family, friends, and coworkers, fewer opportunities for work, school, or social activities. And it can even be tied with bullying, physical violence, or harassment. Effects of stigma also are connected with inadequate health insurance and covering mental illness treatment. And that's, a very large kind of institutional issue, especially for communities of color. And also the individual belief of helplessness, that you'll never improve your situation. So the way that stigma really, of the ways that we can understand stigma, because these are a lot of really negative effects, negative presentations of how it shows up and on an individual and communal basis. But how can we understand it? Where does it come from? What's the root? The first aspect of this is cultural. So we've touched on this a little bit earlier, but a part of it is acculturative stress, right? So the experience of immigration in and of itself. Many of our first generation, immigrants to this community and the API community were not fluent English speakers, and they really applied entrepreneurial skills, even if they might not have been small business owners or anything similar in their homelands, to be able to provide for their families. This is, the route that they took, and worked long hours, sacrificed so much, and lived really in this survival mindset for a large portion of their lives, and raised their children in this mindset as well. Another aspect that is cultural is shame and saving face, right? So I'm probably the only one that feels this way. I'm an embarrassment to my family if I have depression. I don't even know if my parents know what depression is. I don't even know if I know what depression is, right? And so some of these ideas that are, again, kind of perpetuated by the cultural factors leads to perfectionistic tendencies, right? I can never make a mistake. I'm going to let my family down. Feelings of isolation, I'm going to let someone down, or I'm going to make my parents feel as though they're not going to be able to feel that there's a return on their sacrifices if I am really struggling with my mental health. And this is connected to low self-esteem and efficacy as well. Or even as a parent, not being able to be vulnerable with really anyone, the sense of isolation, and trying to save face from bringing any kind of shame or a sense of weakness to themselves. Part of this is part of stigma is societal as well, right? So it really doesn't help that there is a lack of ethnic match and representation in the faces of the mental health care providers that you see that are sought out even when AAPI folks seek out mental health. This makes it difficult for AAPI folks to feel that they have access to care that is empathic. There's someone that will understand my experiences without me having to, write an autobiography on it. This is really important because AAPI folks, even compared to all other racial and ethnic groups, find it the most important that they have a mental health provider that is of the same, racial and ethnic background as them. Also, there is a societal silencing part. We talked a little bit about the model minority myth, but there is this belief, not just in the AAPI community, but also the belief that is, insidious in other communities as well, that AAPI folks, don't have problems. They are the hardworking ones, the ones that are good at math, the ones that are, in these like STEM and tech places, right? Places of influence and financial stability. And this is not true in terms of when we look at the data on, on where Asian American and Pacific Islander folks are falling actually in that. But that's kind of the stereotype that has followed AAPI folks. This leads to misconceptions of AAPI experiences and a lack of advocacy when it comes to resources, especially mental health resources that are culturally competent and responsive to the AAPI community. The third leg of this, of understanding stigma, is also communal. And so I want to, share this with the caveat that AAPI folks identify as collectivistic, right? And I think this is a beautiful thing. I think it's a reason why AAPI folks have been able to be so resilient, why the family is so important to, right? And enough to the point where, right, like many folks make decisions around their family, around even not accessing mental health care because they don't want to burden others or, worry their, significant other or family members or, other loved ones. And I think this is, right, a very selfless identity to have. And it's one of the strengths of being AAPI. But right, a lot of times this means that group harmony is more important than individual distress, right? And so this can be also a mismatch with the very prevalent individualistic nature of interventions in the US mental health care system right now, right? So like, who cares what your parents say, or who cares what your, children think, you're in distress, how can we help you, right? And I think there's a difference between empowering the individual, right, from a sense of hopelessness and sadness and things like that. But a lot of times I think the cultural, rub with mental health care providers and AAPI folks. And again, right, the explanation for the high attrition rates and the low help seeking is because this care doesn't feel very in alignment with my communal values, right? The collectivistic values. And so, and when that rupture kind of happens, it's difficult to try to pivot from that. But it also perpetuates stigma because it's like, well, I can't get help anyways from somebody who doesn't really understand me or know me or see me or validates me. And right, the silencing kind of continues. So all three of these are very connected together. Okay, and this is now my favorite part. I want to be mindful of the time. I want to give you all the space too. And we have really zipped through all the materials. So this is the part that I really want to invite you into, first starting to reflect on some of the things that we have talked about. I'm happy to revisit and go back to any of the slides. Again, I know it's a lot of food for thought, but just if you want to revisit anything. But I wanted to first, talk about collective healing because, right, we've talked about some pretty difficult things so far, right? Like what's basically going wrong. But we want to be able to also move forward and move in an empowering direction, despite the things that AAPI folks have experienced and still continue to experience to this day on multiple levels. So first, just to define collective action, right? What moving forward collectively looks like, right? We want to first honor our collectivistic cultural values, but we also want to move them into action. So collective action refers to an action taken by a group of people who share a common goal of challenging inequality, exclusion, and injustice rooted in societal beliefs and behaviors. And what research says about collective action is, so part of it is communal, right? And so there is the importance of social support is very active in all psychological research. And so social support is protective for PTSD, so protective for depression, protective for suicidal ideation, protective for bullying, and all all these again, mental health concerns. And so what this looks like in the space that we are hoping to provide for you all today is providing a space for conversations around some of the effects of, the effects of negative mental health. So around perfectionism, emotion suppression, isolation, intergenerational conflict. I imagine that, for many folks, in this virtual room, these are experiences that you can all relate to in some sort of way. Also, a community collective action is increasing mental health literacy. So congratulations, you all have done that first step by even attending today's seminar. And so increasing what you know about it, what is going on a societal level, what is going on a community level, what is going on at a family level, and what is going on an individual level. So increasing your education around these topics, what's going on in the community, and being able to present your own thoughts and experiences related to what you know. So the importance of psychoeducation, continuing to do and have spaces like this where you not just learn about what's going on in the community related to mental health, but have the space to talk about it and in a way that really honors and preserves confidentiality in that culture. Okay. I'm gonna try to move this along. Okay, and so what collective action looks like on a systemic level, right? And because a lot of the work that I just touched on before, we do that on a community-based level, right? Having those conversations with one another, increasing the literacy amongst each other, right? And what is learning about Asian American mental health, Pacific Islander mental health together. But on a systemic level, and this is, where we would want to invite, non-API identifying folks to also be allies and friends and advocates along with this effort for the community, is for pushing for ethnic match with counselors, mental health professionals in institutional spaces, right? So whether that's in universities or clinical settings in hospitals or counseling centers, outpatient treatment centers, community care centers, right? There's a wide gamut of them, but for culturally competent mental health care. And we touched so many times on how important this is, right? I want to be able to have someone that understands me, that can be yeah, I know what that immigration process was like. I know how much, my family really struggled, and that really matters to me that you understand that, right? So pushing for Asian American, Pacific Islander identifying mental health providers in these institutional spaces. Another systemic level that we can gauge action on is civic engagement. And so, reaching out to your legislators, governors, and so folks that you have constituencies with, and asking for this on a policy level, right? So regarding the expansion and access to resources. And I think in the video that we had watched earlier, they were talking about, the importance of folks that are bilingual, right? And whether that's mental health therapists or caseworkers, right? Folks that really feel I'm not going to be in emotional danger or even physical danger as I interact with you. Another level that we can do some community action is around recognition that there are larger systems against us, right? So the larger systems of racism, classism, and other forms of discrimination need to be dismantled for every, person of color, for their general wellness, right? So having some difficult conversations maybe around these topics are going to be really important for folks to be well, and I think a lot of the times the piece about the survival mentality is that it becomes our last priority, right? And so understandably so, when you have been exposed to war and poverty and hunger and home instability, like all of those things, that it sets a mindset for an entire generation, right? And then that mindset gets transmitted to the next generation. So this prioritization of wellness, right, is a whole different, like you just changed the paradigm completely, but it's a really important one. So that, some of these actions are effective, they're powerful, because every person, every community, and especially those that have been oppressed, right? Like they have a deserving of the wellness and thriving as well, and no longer just surviving. Okay, and so again, my favorite part, I'm turning the mics on to you. So I'm actually going to, let me see. So the questions are going to be pretty short. I can put it in the chat as well for you all, but I would encourage you, if you feel comfortable in this space, to turn on your cameras. And again, I know there's a big number of us, there's 73, so it might be a little bit hodgepodge at first, but I want to invite you all to, be participants in this conversation. It is a intensely personal one, intensely subjective one, even everything that I've shared, right, so far, and the ways that you might relate to that topic or to this topic. And so I think there's power in stories, and it's, very, it is a systematic way that we experience healing, right? To be able to say like, hey, this happened to me, or this happened to my parents, in their business, and to receive, right? Like, yeah, like me too. And that was really hard. And, and I think that's the way that we move forward from just learning about it to healing. And so I really want to invite you all to share in this space with me. So yeah, I'll stop sharing, and then I'm going to put the question in the chat for you all for your reference. But yeah, whenever and whoever is comfortable to start us off, just want to welcome you all to this space. Also, I'm a psychologist, so I'm very comfortable with silence, so I can wait all day. Okay, I think we have Amelia. I see a hand raised. All right, take it away, Amelia.
Can you pose the question again? What is it? Just so I can reference it back. But I am a chair for our business resource group at my company, and one of the things that we have been struggling with is how to bring mental health, or the topic of mental health, into the workplace and make it relevant, not political, trying to kind of, and also it's still really uncomfortable and tough for people to even have that conversation. So I'm in Atlanta, and so we took that, last year with the shooting, when it happened, no one really knew what to do, but our senior leadership show that, hey, you can have this safe space in the workplace to talk about it. So we hosted a mental health check-in right after the shooting. And then this year we had a 1-year reflective to kind of think back, okay, what has happened in the past year? Has things gone better? Or, but at the very least, that opened up how more comfortable we are having these type of conversations in the workplace. And to me, that is what it means as a leader in my organization to bring, what does collective action looks like in the workplace, is normalizing speaking about mental health, but also providing the space to do it. It's not everybody's ready, right? So we at least offer it to our members, and whoever comes, come, and whoever wants to speak can speak. But to your point, it's usually silence. But I can see that, the more people are in those meetings, the better they feel about, okay, what can we do?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing, Amelia. I'm actually in Atlanta too. So look at us Atlanteans. I know. And so glad to hear that. I think I want to echo some of the thoughts. It sounds like it's difficult, but in fact, and this is, we're positively reframing things here. Some of the really horrendous and heinous things that the API community has experienced in the past 2 years actually became a pathway for folks, whether on an individual or, like a, workplace basis, or even, within friends and communities, for them to have some of these conversations, right? And that being really healing in and of itself. And so I'm so glad to hear that. Okay. Cindy, I'm going to ask, okay, and take it away.
Hello. I wanted to point out something within me, myself, and back with my own personal experiences and everything of all the obstacles of what I have gone through. I truly advocate for myself. And one of my hugest goals is to educate more awareness about mental health, just human behavior as in general. Because nobody's perfect, of course. There's that monkey see, monkey do theory, of course. Since you did go to school for psychology, I'm pretty sure you are aware of it. There's that monkey see, monkey do theory. But at the same time, a lot of people don't realize that with human behavior itself, it causes for each individual to actually have so many mental health issues, and it's being buried underneath the rug. I don't see it within, it's with every I do believe in generational trauma, historical trauma, and all that. But as a Hmong person, I'm Hmong, by the way, but as an Asian person, everything in the mental field is buried underneath the rug. I feel that it's not, with mental health, it's not being brought to anybody's attention. Nobody speaks of it. It's like taboo. And I feel that it needs to be taught, it needs to be educated. Disability wise, as in physical, yes, it's there, it's answered, there's help. But when it comes down to mental health itself, it needs to be more educated about that. It needs to be brought to people's attention that like literally it's a real thing. I feel that being taught at a younger age about it, it's always a stigma of society. It's always society that screws it up, and I see it all the time. And my hugest goal is to open up a nonprofit organization and just educate, bring more awareness about mental health, about human behavior, about all these things that is buried underneath the rug. And it's basically human behavior itself. It's not just within Asian communities, it's with each ethnicity out there. And it's just something that needs to be brought attention to. And that's all I really want to say.
Thank you. And again, I also want to encourage you all to respond to each other. Again, I don't want it to be like someone says something and I say something. This is supposed to be a community effort. I think I forgot to kind of include that in the front end. So if you all have anything to respond to what one another is saying, like I want to welcome you to do that. But thank you for sharing.
I think we have Nancy up next.
Hi, I'm in San Francisco, and we do have, not a lot, but we do have nonprofits that are really very, very attuned to what the AAPI community needs. So, if you're looking for models, I would suggest, looking up San Francisco's organizations. My organization is a nonprofit, but I'm a performing arts nonprofit. Even though I have a MSW, I stopped my LCSW. I had a private practice and saw lots of Asian Americans. And my project some help with figuring out if I'm on the right track is I've hired 6 Asian American storytellers, professional storytellers, to tell their stories of discrimination, but ones in which there's a positive going forward in their story. And then we're going to have a panel, and it's going to be facilitated by Russell Jung, who is the co-founder of Stop AAPI Hate. And I'd love for us to have a topic, and I'm not sure, having listened to all your presentation, that there might be something more that I'm missing. So would need to have some input as to what kind of topics the panel could address. Then the participants will go into small groups and tell their own stories about their own racist experiences, and with another Q&A, and then go to a training how to be a safe witness and a safe victim. So I'm not sure that that's a good rounded out program. So I would love to see if there's any other suggestions and things I need to be careful of. And this will take place in January or February of next year. So I have time.
Yeah, I mean, so I want to give chances for folks to, yeah, it looks like Cindy put it in the chat. Sorry, y'all, it is 3 hours behind California time where I am. So I am kind of like, whoo. But yeah, I would, Nancy, I think this, so we have a Q&A time, and I'm happy to, for folks to kind of ask me questions. I'm also, providing my email address for connection later as well. But anybody have, maybe suggestions for Nancy? I think this is a good, effort to reach out to others to bounce some ideas.
Yeah, I mean, particularly, how important it is to tell our own stories, to get it off, getting people's other responses, experience compassion and understanding. So it helps to lessen the load.
I really have to say, I definitely agree with you by sharing the stories, because for me, myself, I used to be a professional, and I had to, for all the obstacles of what I've gone through, I truly became an advocate for myself. I became a human rights activist, to tell you the honest truth, but overall, just with all the obstacles of a person's battlefield that they have to go through, it's not powerful enough until a person's voice is heard. I feel that just by sharing stories like with what you're saying, it empowers people, it motivates people, it gives people inspiration as well. Because I'm telling you, I have severe mental health issues, and I'm telling you, I allowed that to empower me as a person. I think I've become really extremely resilient upon all the obstacles of what I had to face and to challenge through, knowing the factors that I am first generation here, and being born here, raised here, and everything. It's so sad, because I've come across so many different ethnicities, and they mentioned, like, for example, just recently I came across a vet. He's Caucasian, of course. He has stated to me that, it's going to take about 3 generations for Hmong people just to understand the society. And I did say to him, yes, that is true. And the thing is, why should it take 3 generations when it could just take one? We only live one time. Why not educate it? Why not bring more awareness? Why not do this? Why not start now? Why not do it now versus later? It does not. Someone needs to do it, and I want to be the first one to do it. I don't mind the factors of it's going to take me years and years. I don't mind. I will do whatever that it takes just to educate to bring more awareness about it, because it's something that it is so, it's always the stigma of society that really screws it up for us. And that's just the honest truth. But I do agree with you about sharing stories.
Yeah, I think that really helps because one of the maybe one of the topics could be with the trauma. What can you learn from it? How can you use it to empower yourself? I think that's what I hear you saying, and that's perfect. And the other thing is to, of course, give out resources so that they know there's a place that they can go and be safe to go further in depth into their trauma.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Cindy, for your vulnerability. I think that was really brave of you. Yeah. Anybody else? Again, and we don't have to talk, particularly just about collective action as well, but if anyone is having thoughts or reactions to everything that was kind of shared during today's seminar, I want to give you some processing space here as well to reflect together as a community. Because we're doing exactly the thing, right, that even Nancy and Cindy are talking about, like, right, being able to do this in a collective way. So, any brave souls?
Hi, can you hear me? Yeah, so my name is Bobby. I'm actually in Sacramento, California, and I was reflecting on, as far as the question of what collective action looks like. There were groups like the Kahakule Institute, We Each Belong, and I forget the name of the Korean leader that leads healing circles. And in those healing circles is a strong component of storytelling and talk story, as Islanders like to put it. And I think just having that non-judgmental space where people can be heard and just be, where we aren't necessarily running out to try to fix everything all at once, especially like big, huge social problems like what we're dealing with right now. There are no quick answers, but just being able to listen and support is incredibly helpful, and that collective sharing. Locally, I'm a former board member of the Union Community Services as well, and we have a senior program where we just hold space for them, and the seniors come along and they take vegetables out of their gardens and they barter and trade for chili and different things for food. And I think that breaking bread is just another wonderful way that we can soothe one another and support one another when times can be difficult. I don't know if I'm necessarily advocating that we become emotional eaters, but I think that the sharing of time is really the more important part.
Was anyone else incredibly touched by that? I know that there were a couple of people that responded to you in the chat, Bobby. That is, yeah, very powerful. I think, like, absolutely. Yeah, I think that is collective action. Sometimes, right, doing something collectively looks like breaking that bread together and sharing those personal stories and being together and like having an open space, right? There's a reason why our parents, the first way that they express affection was, did you eat today? What did you eat today? And I'm like, oh, Mom, you're saying you love me, and it's a way for us to bond and connect and nourish one another, not just physically, but also, emotionally as well. So I thank you so much for those suggestions. Any other thoughts on just kind of our time spent together today on this topic?
I think I really like the idea of like having these community spaces and where people can like gather and eat food together. And that's kind of a way to also, I think, challenge the stigma around mental health or like talking about mental health, because I think like a lot of families or like parents, they might feel pressure to like attend maybe like a workshop or event that is like specifically, let's talk about like AAPI mental health. But if it's like wrapped in like a more like fun kind of like community event and a safe space for people and families to show up, then like they both get like a kind of like fun and healing experience. But then also if there's like some kind of like conversation or like group discussion that's incorporated into that event, then like hopefully that's like, and they're able to like come to that and like get something new out of it in terms of better understanding of their own mental health and like better understanding AAPI mental health. So yeah, just wanted to share that.
Absolutely. Such beauty in community, right? And again, like whether it's hate crimes or the great things, the beautiful things about being API, it's like we can hold space for both of those things, right? And care for one another. And I mean, I'm reading the chat right now and just like feeling so moved, and just folks wanting to connect and asking for each other's contact information. This in and of itself, right, is really beautiful. I feel like it's healing because there's solidarity in that.
Hello, this is Bao Chiu from Vivo. I have a question here on the collective action. We are, of course, we are having empathy with the one who suffer from the mental health, the trauma and the stigma. But regarding collective action, what do we do with in the family, for example? There are family members who wouldn't recognize that. For example, I know a few cases that the parents, they are pushing their children to be excellent in school. And the children feeling the pressure. They try to do good in school and to the point that they break down, but the parents wouldn't recognize that. They keep doing that. So in this case, what do you think that can be done? If you have some hints or some advice.
Yeah, so I'm happy to address this question. I also invite others because again, this is probably a widely shared experience. So if folks want to add on to what I'm saying, please feel free to do that. I want to extend the invitation. I think it's twofold, right? And so a lot of times, I think folks think that it's just an addressing of the child, right, in this interplay, but there's actually some processing that I would suggest for the parents to go through, right? So like, what does the pushing look like? And if the child is receiving it as a way where this is too much, then like what desire in it is good, because there's a good desire for children or for parents to challenge their children towards excellence, right? I think that's a very good thing about Asian parents, right? I don't really believe in the like term or idea of tiger parenting, like, because underneath that is love and also fear, because they don't want their kids to have to go through what they went through. But it's when that understanding can happen both on the parent and the child's they can understand each other and really have a sense of connection in that way. Like, oh, my parents are pushing me because they love me, but I can also respond as an individual and as a unit in this family, family system, that these are the ways that I haven't appreciated, and it's made me feel too pushed over the edge, right? Or too ashamed of how I was performing, right? And then the parents, I think it would be helpful if they are able to hear that and listen to that. And a lot of times, right, because the intentions of parents are love and protection over their child, when they hear this feedback from the child, the automatic response is like defensiveness or hurt, even by the parents, right? Because it's like, oh, we're doing so much to try to provide for you and protect you and love you, and it's like, man, like, am I doing something wrong? But as opposed to kind of jumping into that headspace, being like, okay, how can I hear what my child is saying and how can I respond differently, right? And then I think it has been enormously helpful for, at least in the folks that I have worked with, for parents to also have the space to grieve that they've had to live a life with a survival mindset. A lot of times, right, what is perpetuated with the stigma is because the first generation, the immigrant generation, never had a space, right, to be like, that must have been so, so hard, you know, like to have to pick yourself up day after day. Doesn't matter if, you know, like you're exhausted or sick, or if it's Christmas, or, you know, like I know my parents worked Monday to Sunday, 9 a.m. to 10 p.m., you know, and I just can't imagine, because working 9 to 5 sometimes I'm like, this I need a vacation, you know. And so I think the space for our first generation to also have to be like, to be honored, to be respected, that I think will serve really well, not just for the first generation, but even how they interact with the second, right? And so they don't need to do the pushing so much, right? Because they also have this sense of appreciation, sense of wellness, and it changes the dynamic. So that was a really long-winded way of addressing your question. I don't even know if I answered it fully, but that's kind of my initial thoughts. Anybody else? Anyone else have responses to that? Y'all can just jump in.
Hi, my name is Derwisha, and I'm a senior at California State University, Sacramento, and I work for the PETA Center here. I just want to say, as someone who had been a lot of academically pressured in childhood, and I feel like I still get pressured, I have realized that my parents have some unprocessed trauma that they cannot do anything about, and they need their own space. And what they do is, because that was done to them before, and it's like a vicious cycle. And I'm just really grateful that I realized that, and it ends with me, and it's not gonna have to happen to my kids. So that's just something I want to put it out there, that you need to understand your parents' trauma too. And that's it.
I want to piggyback on that. I know in our community, I'm a current board member for the Philippine National Day Association, and we have a youth conference every year, and a strong component of that is like just a lot of talking about our feelings, and these pressures are constantly coming up. And sadly, a few years ago, we did have a student that committed suicide. And other than, like, there were, you know, they were a good student, they were performing well in school, but I guess what is called like smiling depression was kind of going on in this student. And one of the things that we do now that we include in the component, and we did this even as far back as, like, I want to say 2000, we talk about silent sacrifices that each generation is making for one another. And there's actually a documentary called Silent Sacrifices, where it talks about what the immigrant generation is doing, making sacrifices in order to come to a new country to try to create a better life for their child. And then conversely, silent sacrifices that the child is making in trying to live in these two lives, right? Like our predominantly ethnic life, and then our predominantly like American life, where sometimes they are like at odds as far as value systems. And we try to facilitate a conversation and a listening session with both parents and students so that they get in the same room and they get another Hawaiian concept is called getting tupono, where they are like sitting face to face, kneecap to kneecap, and really understand one another, versus trying to avoid issues or sitting askew and not directly communicating with one another. Really, like, we found that that's like the best way to handle it. Of course, it has to be done with really great facilitators in the room that can make that happen. And so I know in my community, I lean on a lot of trusted professionals, like influencers that they may have the title in the Filipino community that might be a priest, or maybe a psychologist or a psychiatrist, someone with that doctorate degree that can really bear some influence on those parents. Because generally in my community, I feel like parents suffer under that powdered butt syndrome, where because I powdered your butt, I'm not going to listen to you because I'll always see you as the baby whose butt I powdered. Excuse the graphicness of my example, but just kind of it's hard to break that age gap and that generation gap unless you bring in an outside influence or third party.
Thank you so much for that. I absolutely agree. The power of connection is so important. And I feel like this is like so unimportant because the things that are being shared in this space are so powerful, but I'm gonna just wrap our time up and do some takeaways, and I'll leave some time for Q&A for me, and then I will hand it over to Liz. I have so much sadness though of cutting off this conversation because it's really powerful. But I want to be respectful of y'all's time as well. So Liz, can you let me know if you can see this?
Yes, I can see your PowerPoint.
Okay, great. Okay, so just some wrapping up, takeaway, some points is, so as we've discussed, right, I think we've just really scratched the surface on this, but stigma has some significant negative effects for Asian American Pacific Islander mental health on the individual, communal, and systemic levels, right? And this is contributed by racial inequality and larger systemic institutional issues as well. There's a greater need for mental health professionals who are trained in cultural competency, right? So those facilitators that even Bobby was talking about, right? That can really meet the needs of the community with appropriate training that, you know, can respond culturally, competently, and can understand the experience and the needs of the community. And just like the conversation in this space was, you know, I don't know, I think we chatted for probably 20 minutes or so, but even this was so powerful, right? And I'm seeing in the chat this like hunger for more, but this is a part of collective action, right? And other types of collective action, right, on an individual and on a systemic level too, and in the ways that we can even invite non-API identifying folks to join us as allies is powerful too, and contributing to advancing mental health for API folks. And yeah, just a personal kind of encouragement, right, from me is, you know, to choose empowerment over shame, right? I think a lot of times that we over-identify with the ways that we have been oppressed, and certainly that makes sense because of all the things that we have experienced, again, on an individual and on a community basis with the pandemic, but certainly much, you know, longer before that. Asian Americans have been in the US for, you know, hundreds of years, but it's easy to over-identify with an ashamed identity, right? But I really want to pull out and invite us into choosing identities of empowerment that we belong here, that we belong to, we deserve to take up space, we deserve to have access to resources, and be at the table and on the docket of people's attention, their priorities. And certainly we can do that as we do that for one another, that will speak volumes. And right, community collectivism is our strength. So just want to invite us to really tap into that strength in small and big ways, right? Because any step forward, whether it's a 20-minute conversation with a bunch of people, you know, that you don't even know, but can connect with in some of these experiences, or it's more of these systemic level issues as well in your advocacy work, both in your personal and professional lives. Any step, big or small, is a step, you know, still a step forward. And again, I know I want to be mindful of time and like let y'all go in a timely manner. But if you have any questions for me, I think Liz, we have about 5 minutes for Q&A.
Yes, we have about 5 minutes.
Okay. All right. So I'm happy to answer any questions you all have for me, if any.
The crowd is a little shy.
I have one question. In the presentation, you have some statistics about the AAPI, the percentage of people who have a mental health trauma in the AAPI. I want to know where do you get those statistics from? Is it from federal government or from state or local? So how do we access those statistics also, if you can tell?
Yeah, great question. So I think you're referring to more of the general mental health trends that I shared about in the beginning. That data is mostly from the Health and Human Services. So it is like federal data, and also the Substance Abuse Mental Health Service Administration, which is also federal data. There is a wealth of literature around Asian American mental health. There's like a lot of seminal works from Asian American psychologists though that publish in more like private journals, and you get a much more deeper understanding of mental health when you peruse, I think, like scholarly work rather than kind of just like bigger statistics, is my professional opinion. But you can find that data too just by looking up like Health and Human Services, and then it should break it down by like per racial ethnic group.
Oh, great. Okay, so I can follow that out. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I actually have a question. Like, for example, I did say that I always want to open up a nonprofit organization just to bring more awareness and everything, to educate, to teach, to whatever. But overall, in general, I think my hugest question is just reaching out to other organizations, reaching out to leaders, to whoever it is, to empower people and all that stuff. Just finding the funds and all that stuff it's something that has always been a huge issue to a lot of people, that they don't realize there's so many grants out there that is, you know, with federal whatever, and it's come down to the point where it's just like, okay, is there a need for it? And that's something that I've always wanted to address, even though there's data collected. I'm sorry, I'm like everywhere about this. So even you stated there's a lot of data research and all that stuff, but a lot of people, they don't realize that within data itself, it's inaccurate with what's being collected as well about Asian people in general, about mental health and all that stuff, because there's people who have the fear of speaking. There's people who don't actually go out there and advocate for themselves, and they tend to like, oh yeah, that's this person, like I stated, everything's buried underneath the rug. And I wish that there was more sessions, more classes, more organizations that actually like was in more depth to be more specific in depth in general, just to really go deep down to the core about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, for time constraints and trying to cover such a large topic as Asian American mental health, and even the topic of trauma in the community, right, is a pretty broad topic as well. And so I think we try to I tried to cover it as kind of quickly as possible, but totally understandable that it didn't feel as like in depth about even specific one thing, right? I think I'm not sure if that like there was a question in that or if you were just like processing out loud, but I think, you know, there are definitely organizations that you can get plugged into. I know of a lot of profits that address mental health, Asian American Mental Health Collective, Mustard Seed Generation, and even within, right, nonprofits that just serve Asian American Pacific Islander interests, there will be somebody, you know, that kind of does work around advocacy, and that can, you know, mental health can belong into one of those umbrellas. So I just suggest that maybe you like look into some of those options, and I think that will be helpful. I know Liz has some concluding words for us, so I'm going to kind of wrap up our Q&A time, but I think she'll mention at the end that there is an email, and again, happy to, you know, try to connect or, you know, provide as a professional resource for you all. But thank you so much, everyone. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And Hannah, again, thank you for taking the time, you know, to educate us and, you know, increase our awareness when it comes to the psychological impacts and racial trauma experienced by the API community. You know, providing, you know, these tips and answering questions, you know, and just deepening our conversation here. And just a big thank you to everyone for, you know, all the participants, not only in this virtual training, but all the trainings that we've held, you know, since the beginning of the year. You know, a big thank you, you know, to really for opening up and joining us and sharing, you know, more about what is going on. You know, this really helps, you know, inform our program so that we can bring you more training, so we can bring more roundtable discussions with, civic and business leaders to make them aware of what is going on so we can help, shape policy, right? Through our partners like National ACE. So thank you guys for just everything in your time, and thank you to our sponsors that are able to, continue to support and be a part of this initiative. Thank you to all our partners and National ACE. Again, thank you for your support and your contributions to this initiative. And remember that together we are AAPI Strong. So I hope everyone has a really great day.